represent the Pennsylvania State Police, Troop B Commander, Captain Joseph Ruggery, along with Sergeant John Weaver, along with the Washington County District Attorney, Mr. Eugene Vitone. They're going to brief you shortly on the events that took place last night regarding Mr. Brooks. Hopefully you guys can get the answers that you're seeking. There will be questions. However, once questions start, there'll be a 5-minute time limit. Captain Ruggery.
Thank you. Good afternoon again, everybody. I'd like to thank all of you for coming here today and welcome you to the Washington Barracks. As Trooper Broadwater said, I'm Captain Joseph Ruggery, the commanding officer of the Pennsylvania State Police Troop B. This news conference is being held in order to provide some additional information regarding the police-involved shooting which occurred last night. As you're all aware, in that incident, 2 Pennsylvania State Troopers were involved in a deadly confrontation with an armed suspect. Thankfully, I'm able to report to you today that neither of those troopers were injured in that encounter. As you will soon hear, this incident epitomizes the fact that there is no such thing as a, quote, routine. Every time a police officer stops a vehicle for a violation, that officer is literally putting his or her life on the line in order to further our collective law enforcement mission of public safety. These two troopers were proactively engaged in that same mission when they conducted a traffic stop along Interstate 70 last night. Unbeknownst to them at the time, the operator of that vehicle was a fugitive that was wanted for first-degree murder in the state of Florida. This same suspect had already eluded capture by law enforcement in the state of Alabama. In addition, the vehicle that they were stopping had been reported as stolen from Alabama, and the operator was found to be in possession of a stolen loaded pistol. The suspect ultimately fled that traffic stop and initiated a dangerous high-speed vehicle pursuit that traveled westbound in the eastbound lanes of Interstate 70 against oncoming traffic. As the troopers pursued the suspect, he attempted to traverse the grass median of the highway and crashed into a bridge abutment. After his vehicle became disabled, the suspect exited and fled on foot down a steep embankment and onto the interstate ramp below. Our 2 troopers exited their patrol vehicle and gave chase. At that time, the troopers observed that the suspect was in possession of a pistol. They both gave him repeated verbal commands to drop the weapon, which he refused. When the suspect turned towards the troopers with the pistol still in his hand, deadly force was employed to stop his actions. The need to use deadly force when called upon to do so is a heavy responsibility that every police officer bears when they swear their oath. It is not a responsibility that we take joy in, nor is it a responsibility that we take lightly. Nevertheless, deadly force is at times necessary when it is the only reasonable means by which we are able to protect ourselves or others against the imminent threat of serious bodily injury or death. These decisions must also be made in a microsecond, under extreme duress, and irrespective of the involved officer's prior knowledge of the suspect or lack thereof. In accordance with Pennsylvania State Police Department policy and in consultation with the Washington County District Attorney's Office, the names of the involved troopers will not be released here today. Any future releases of their names by the Pennsylvania State Police will be coordinated through our Department Public Information Officer, Corporal Adam Reed. The details of last night's incident are as follows. On Thursday, April 12, 2018, at approximately 11:22 p.m., 2 troopers from the Troop B Washington Station were on routine patrol when they encountered a white Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck bearing Alabama registration, which was being operated in an erratic manner westbound on Interstate 70 in South Strabane Township, Washington County. Suspecting that the operator was possibly impaired by drugs or alcohol, the troopers conducted a traffic stop on the vehicle along the off-ramp to State Route 19, Mertland Avenue. The troopers exited their patrol vehicle and made contact with the operator and sole occupant of the vehicle, Stephen J. Brooks, also known as Sadiq Shuja Mashouk, a 45-year-old African-American male whose last known place of residence was in St. Petersburg, Florida. As stated previously, an active warrant for Mr. Brooks' arrest existed pursuant to a homicide of an unnamed female victim. This warrant had been issued out of Pinellas County, Florida on March 28, 2018. Our investigation would later determine that, following that homicide, Mr. Brooks had fled the state of Florida and had been residing with his estranged girlfriend in Madison County, Alabama. On April 11, 2018, at approximately 9:30 p.m., U.S. Marshals and the Madison County SWAT team converged on that residence and attempted to negotiate Mr. Brooks' surrender. Mr. Brooks refused to surrender, and he fled the residence in an unknown vehicle, which then initiated a high-speed vehicle pursuit with law enforcement. That pursuit ended when Mr. Brooks drove into a swamp and abandoned the vehicle on foot and ran into a heavily wooded area. Law enforcement immediately set up a perimeter and began a manhunt for Mr. Brooks. However, Mr. Brooks was able to evade capture and subsequently stole a white Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck from a location approximately 8 miles from where he was last seen. Nearly 26 hours later, Mr. Brooks was operating that same pickup truck along Interstate 70 in southwestern Pennsylvania when he was stopped by our troopers. Mr. Brooks would again flee from law enforcement, and he would again endanger many innocent motorists as he operated that pickup truck in a reckless manner that showed extreme disregard for human life. Our troopers pursued Mr. Brooks westbound in the eastbound lanes of Interstate 70 until he crashed into a bridge abutment in a failed attempt to traverse the grassy highway median back into the eastbound lanes. As stated previously, Mr. Brooks exited his vehicle and fled on foot. Mr. Brooks was in possession of a .40 caliber Beretta pistol that was loaded with 10 rounds of ammunition at that time. The investigation would later reveal that that pistol had been reported stolen in the state of Florida in 2014. The two troopers gave Mr. Brooks repeated verbal commands to show his hands as they pursued him on foot down a steep embankment onto the interstate ramp below. When they observed the pistol in his possession, they again gave him clear, repeated verbal commands to drop the weapon. Mr. Brooks refused to do so, and at that point in the encounter, Mr. Brooks turned back towards the troopers with the pistol in his hand. Both troopers fired multiple rounds from their department-issued Sig Sauer .45 caliber pistols at that time in order to stop his actions. Mr. Brooks was struck several times before he could fire any return rounds at the troopers. The troopers immediately summoned advanced medical care for Mr. Brooks, but he subsequently died from his injuries at the scene before any treatment could be rendered by the troopers themselves or emergency medical services. Our Troop B major case team, which is comprised of members of the Troop B Criminal Investigation Section, Patrol Section, and Command Staff, was activated to investigate this incident. Since the two involved troopers are assigned to the Troop B Washington Station, a criminal investigation unit supervisor from the Uniontown Station was assigned as the lead investigator. This is in keeping with our standard protocol regarding serious police incidents, wherein a supervisor from a station other than that of the involved members is tasked with the investigation to ensure impartiality. As always, the Pennsylvania State Police is fully committed to conducting a thorough, unbiased investigation into this officer-involved shooting. Once the situation at the scene was stabilized, the District Attorney of Washington County, Mr. Eugene Vitone, was contacted immediately. This was done to ensure complete transparency, as the District Attorney's Office has direct oversight over our entire investigative process. Mr. Vitone personally responded to the scene and was integrated into our investigation. Also in accordance with Pennsylvania State Police policy, both of the involved troopers will be placed on administrative duties as the investigation into this officer-involved shooting continues. Once the criminal investigation is completed, it will be forwarded to District Attorney Vitone for his review and determination as to the trooper's justification to use deadly force in this instance. Once Mr. Vitone's determination on justification has been made, regardless of the outcome, a full administrative investigation by the Pennsylvania State Police Internal Affairs Division will immediately follow. In closing, I would like to state how truly blessed we are that neither any innocent bystanders nor our troopers were injured by Mr. Brooks' actions last night. I also want to thank the few passing motorists that were brave enough to stop at the scene of the shooting and remain there in order to provide investigators with their firsthand accounts of the incident. If anyone else witnessed or has knowledge of any portion of this incident, I strongly urge you to contact the Pennsylvania State Police, Washington Barracks at area code 724-223-5200 and report any information that you feel may be of assistance. Lastly, I also want to thank all of our brothers and sisters in law enforcement from the United States Marshal Service, the Madison County Sheriff's Department in Alabama, and the Pinellas County Park Police Department in Florida for their assistance, as well as the Washington County District Attorney's Office and the Washington County Coroner's Office. Without the close partnership that we have with these agencies, our collective job in protecting and serving your communities would be made much more difficult. This concludes my statement, and I also want to let you know that I sincerely appreciate your patience as I know that this was a long, convoluted chain of events to relate to you today. I will now take a few minutes of questions. So whoever wants to go first.
Do you have any idea why he was in this area, and were you aware that he might be headed this way?
We were not aware that he was in this area. So your question was, did we know that he was in this area? Do we have any idea why he was in this area? The only assumption that we could make at this time is the fact that he was traversing an interstate highway. He was in between the north and south junction of I-70 and I-79. So apparently he was planning to take either one of those two interstate routes to whatever his final destination was. Next question.
How did he get from the westbound lane into the eastbound lane? He was initially going west, correct?
That's correct. Whenever our troopers were behind him, her question was, how did he get from the westbound lane into the eastbound lanes? So when our troopers encountered him, he was traveling westbound in the westbound lanes of I-70 in the vicinity of the Mertland Avenue exit. As I said, he was driving very erratically, weaving outside of his lane, almost struck the Jersey barrier on a number of occasions, leading them to believe that he was possibly an impaired driver. They activated their emergency lighting and siren, and they pulled him over onto the off-ramp at the Mertland Avenue exit. At that point, both of our troopers approached, had a very brief interaction with him, and at that point, he fled the traffic stop, essentially turned a U-turn, crossed all 4 lanes of Interstate 70, and then began to proceed westbound in the eastbound lanes against traffic.
Did the suspect have his hand on his weapon when he was shot, or how was he placed? Was there any indication he was about to fire?
Well, that's difficult to tell at this time. Again, it's still under investigation. He did have the weapon in his hand and accessible to him, and therefore, we believe that our members were at serious risk of bodily injury or death at that time.
Did he point the weapon at troopers?
We don't know that at this time yet.
I know you touched on this in the beginning, but can you speak to the level of danger that these 2 troopers were, coming up on in a traffic stop?
Again, it's kind of a cliche in law enforcement, again, that there is no such thing as a routine traffic stop. And regrettably, on occasion in law enforcement, we have these occasions like this where these things do transpire, where, again, these 2 troopers were expecting, they try to prepare for the worst, but probably they were expecting, an impaired operator or somebody that was falling asleep at the wheel or was texting and wasn't paying attention. And in reality, they ran up against Mr. Brooks, who was more than prepared for that encounter and had obviously been fleeing law enforcement and criminal prosecution for a first-degree murder for quite some time.
What was the process as far as discovering that this was someone that was wanted and had a warrant out for his arrest, and all these various things he's gone through before coming here?
Right. Well, we have at our disposal here at the Pennsylvania State Police a troop intelligence officer who was able to interface with the Pennsylvania Criminal Intelligence Center. The plate on the vehicle, it was an Alabama registration on that truck, which is relatively unusual for this area, being that we're so far north. And essentially they ran the plate. The plate was entered as stolen. Investigators down there reasonably believed that Mr. Brooks was probably the one that was in possession of that vehicle, given the proximity to, their pursuit with him and the incident that took place down there. And so it was a matter of our investigators up here reaching out with, the investigators from Alabama and the Marshal Service deputies and also the investigators in Florida. And we're all kind of collectively piecing this together at this time. And again, I can't reiterate enough how helpful they've all been through this process, and we're tremendously grateful for their support.
How many years of service did the involved troopers have?
We're not prepared to release that at this time.
Were they riding together?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any indication how fast the suspect may have been going during this pursuit?
We do not yet. That's something that is probably, again, we're relatively, we're less than 24 hours into this. So this investigation is really still in its infancy. There's a lot of work and a lot of investigative man-hours that are going to follow from this point forward. And that's one of the things that we're going to look at is, the exact determination of the speed of the pursuit and the exact end of it.
Do investigators think that the pistol he was found with is the pistol that was used in the homicide in Florida?
I can't release that information at this time. That's, again, still under active investigation.
Do you think this was a suicide by cop? Do you think he was?
I really couldn't speculate on this time, as if it were a suicide by cop. All we know is that, the preliminary indications is that our troopers felt that they were in grave danger and reacted accordingly with the force that they felt was appropriate, to basically prevent their own loss of life.
And I know everything happened so quickly, but did they even know that the truck was stolen when they initially?
We're still trying to piece that together at this time. Ultimately, that's a determination that we'll be able to make, but again, there's many investigative steps that we need to take. Okay. All right, so that's it. That's the 5 minutes. Again, we really appreciate you guys coming. Thank you for your time, and everybody have a great afternoon.